You may be seated. And if you have your Bibles, you can turn to 1 Samuel. We're in chapter 9 and 10. And again, we have a couple of chapters, but that are kind of stuck together in this story as we get introduced to Saul, our first, not really our first main character, but throughout the rest of the book now, we're going to have this comparison, this compare and contrast between Saul and David. And so we get introduced to Saul, and it's in the context of this idea that God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. So we've been seeing that in the lives of Israel, in their spiritual leaders now as they want a king. And they've asked not just for a king, because God provided for that in Deuteronomy 17. They've actually asked for a king like all the other nations. And so they've asked for a dangerous king, a bad king. And Samuel's made it clear last week in chapter 8, Samuel said, hey, this is what a king like you're asking for is going to do. And it's not going to be good. In fact, you're going to get to the point where you're like, this is bad, and you're going to cry out to God, and he is not going to listen to you in that day of distress. And so Samuel, he tells all the people the bad news about the king that they want, and then he sends them home as if to say, hey, go ahead and sleep on it. Like every major decision, you should sleep on it. And some time passes. We don't know how much time. They've already said that Samuel's old, so it can't be that much time because Samuel's just getting older and older. But there's some time, and chapter 9 opens this way. There was a Benjamite, a man of standing, whose name was Kish, son of Abiel, the son of Zeor, the son of Becharath, the son of Abijah of Benjamin. Kish had a son named Saul, as handsome a young man as could be found anywhere in Israel, and he was a head taller than anyone else. Now the donkeys belonging to Saul's father, Kish, were lost, and Kish said to his son Saul, take one of the servants with you and go and look for the donkeys. Now, I don't know if you knew this, but I became a grandfather last Monday. And she is incredibly cute and adorable. And yet I just want to, I just want to look at those pictures for a second because she's so cute. And, it's pretty cool to see my son holding his firstborn child. And I'm reminded that it's, now we have another generation. And so it's interesting to see how this text opens, because if you remember, like when we were introduced to Samuel, we were introduced to Elkanah, his dad. And Elkanah was a man in good standing. He was an Israelite that was respected, and he went up and he worshiped on a regular basis. And so we were introduced to some of the positive characteristics of that family dynamic. And we were introduced to his mother. We don't really get that, we don't get introduced to Samuel's mother or Saul's mother, but we do get introduced to his father right off the bat. And so we have this pattern where we go, okay, now we're going to have to see what happens with the next generation. We were just told that Samuel's old. We've already been introduced to his sons, and we've seen that it's a pivotal step to the next generation. It's really important. And so again, I'd just say, if you didn't make time to read Deuteronomy 6 last week, I'd just commend it to you again. It's just a great, applicable scripture about how do we pass this on to the next generation? How do we make sure that little Ivy Ann really understands who Jesus is and comes to understand his word? How do we do that? I was, at Living Hope this morning, they have a retired pastor filling their pulpit for the next couple of weeks, and so it came up that I'd been in Illinois this week and knew Grandpa, and he was like, I have 22 grandchildren. I was like, okay, you win. And 16 of them live very close, and he's like, every week we do a Bible study together. Oh, man. If they lived that close, could we do that? Could we have a Bible study every week where we're introducing the gospel and the scriptures and the Lord to the next generation? And I just thought, what a great, great, great thing. This text also tells us a couple of other things. It tells us that Kish, he was a Benjamite, that his son was handsome, but it also tells us that Kish was pretty successful. He had donkeys. You go, why is that any indication of successful? I learned something new this week. Donkeys were used to protect sheep back in the day. Did anybody know that? Guard donkeys. They were real. I looked them up. There's like this whole history of guard donkeys because they would fight off wild dogs better than anything else. And I thought, that is weird. But he had donkeys, which meant he had sheep. And like it seems like he had a lot of donkeys, which would indicate he had a lot of sheep. And we're told that he's in good standing. Like he's a man of great wealth and power in the tribe of Benjamin. And his son is like, whew, he is a handsome dude. In fact, the Bible, like if the Bible would declare this of you, I mean, think about it. The best looking person in all Israel. Wow. That's the Bible's documentary of Saul. It's incredible. Tall, dark, and handsome. Absolutely. The tallest, the darkest, the handsomest. It's amazing. He is all that. And it seems like he has a good relationship with his family because his dad comes to him and says, hey, the donkeys are gone. Would you go take a servant? And he says, sure, I'll go. And then we skip down. I'll read the passages in between, but we're going to verse 6. So he passed through the hill country of Ephraim and through the area around Shalista, but they did not find them. They went on into the district of Shalim, but the donkeys were not there. Then he passed through the territory of Benjamin, and they did not find them. When they reached the district of Zuph, Saul said to the servant who was with him, come, let us go back, or my father will stop thinking about the donkeys, and he will start worrying about us. Crazy. Okay, Dad's going to start worrying about me because they had a good relationship. And so here's our first introduction to Saul. Saul has a lot to take pride in. He's from a favored tribe, Benjamin. Now that should have been a red flag to somebody because in Genesis 49, it says that from Judah the scepter will not pass. And so it seems like very clearly that royal line should be carried on through Judah, and it will be. But Benjamin, like, he was the favorite. Especially after Joseph gets thrown in a pit and sold to Ishmael's slaves and Jacob thinks he's dead, then Benjamin really becomes the favorite. So now here's this tribe of Benjamin who, like a favored tribe. Now there's some stories at the end of the Judges that, hard stuff for Benjamin. But they still would have had a standing. Something would have been okay with them, yeah? Yeah. Totally. We're actually going to touch on that next week when we get introduced, actually 2 weeks, when we get introduced to Jonathan. Because it's Jonathan, who is Saul's son, who is a Benjamite, that actually returns the favor. And he says, my life for his. So, they're connected in powerful ways. So this isn't an accident, but it should just kind of cause us to go, well, wait a second. I didn't think this is how it was going to play out. He's from a wealthy, powerful family. Like, that makes a good king, right? He already has a good family. Like, yeah, let's make him king. And he's good looking. Like, Saul gets 5 stars. Woo! So it seems like he has a lot to take pride in, but that's a dangerous place. So verse 6 says, but the servant said, look, in this town there is a man of God. He is highly respected, and everything he says comes true. Let's go there now. Perhaps he will tell us the way to take. So while Saul has a lot going for him, like favored tribe, wealthy, powerful family, he's really handsome, his servant goes, did you know? Did you know there's a man of God around here? Now, Samuel's been at it for a while now. Samuel toured all of Israel, judging Israel. Like, this is what we know of him. He's been diligent in his service, but Saul is clueless. The servant is like, hey, there's a man of God who's actually pretty incredible. And maybe we should go talk to him. And Saul's like, I didn't know that. And it just seems like while Saul has a lot going for him, a lot to take pride in, he is not aware of or concerned with the things of God. And in this reality, we should go, uh-oh, something's not right. All right, let me fill in the gap here. Saul said to his servant, if we go, what can we give the man? The food in our sacks is gone. We have no gift to take the man of God. What do we have? The servant answered him again. Look, he said, I have a quarter of a shekel of silver. I will give it to the man of God so that he will tell us what way to take. Formerly in Israel, if someone went to inquire of God, they would say, come, let us go to the seer, because the prophet of today used to be called a seer. Okay, that's just a little side note, just to go, hey, we're using semantics here, it's okay. Good, Saul said to his servant, come, let's go. So they set out for the town where the man of God was. As they were going up the hill to the town, they met some women, young women, coming out to draw water, and they asked them, is the seer here? He is, they answered. He's ahead of you. Hurry now. He has just come to our town today, for the people have a sacrifice at the high place. As soon as you enter the town, you will find him before he goes up to the high place to eat. The people will not begin eating until he comes, because he must bless the sacrifice. Afterwards, those who are invited will eat. Go up now. You should find him about this time. It's a lot of information for a stranger. Hey, is the seer here? Yes, and let me give you his whole daily itinerary. It's so true, isn't it? Right. Yeah. They went up to the town, and as they were entering it, there was Samuel coming toward them on his way to the high place. Now, the day before Saul came, the Lord had revealed this to Samuel. About this time tomorrow, I will send you a man from the land of Benjamin. Anoint him to rule over my people Israel. He will deliver them from the hand of the Philistines. I have looked on my people, for their cry has reached me. It's a really interesting passage to me for a couple of reasons. One, Samuel and God had this incredible relationship. And so God says to Samuel, like literally in the Hebrew, it says he whispers in his ear. There's this intimate relationship. Hey, this time tomorrow, it's going to be a man from Benjamin, and then we get that he told him even more. He's looking for donkeys, and you're going to anoint him as king to rule over my people. All timed out well. You know, maybe the ladies had to say as much as they did so that, Samuel was turning the corner at the right time. Like the degree to which God orchestrates this happening is amazing. And so God says, here's my guy, and then God says, here's what he's going to do. Saul has a mission from God. And it's told us, he is to deliver the people from the Philistines. And what we're going to see is, as his story unfolds, is that even though God made this mission really, really clear to him, Saul abandons it pretty quickly. But God is like, hey, I hear my people calling out again. I will deliver them. And this is the guy that I want to do that. It's so interesting when we hear God's specific mandate on a person, because then we have this like litmus test to go, how are they doing? Now, ironically, or maybe not so ironically, like our mission statement, our mission from God is just as clear. Jesus said, hey, this is what I want you to do. I want you to go into all the world, and I want you to make disciples. I want you to teach them to obey everything that I've commanded them, and I want you to baptize them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. This is what I want you to do. And when we get that kind of clarity from God, it gives us this litmus test to go, hey, am I on the right track? And it should help us to go, wow, where am I off? Where am I on? And it will probably point out or highlight pride or humility in your life. Because if we're not doing that, we have to ask, why? And so Saul is given this mission from God, and it's very clear. Here's what I want him to do. He's going to reign over my people, but his big job is to deliver my people from the Philistines. Now, that would be a daunting task because the Philistines were pretty mighty in that day. And at this time, Israel has no standing army whatsoever. They have no way to defend themselves. In fact, we're going to hear next week that they don't even have the ability to make weapons to do that. But what were they supposed to do? What is Saul supposed to do in that regard? Deuteronomy 17 said the king, he's not going to amass horses, he's not going to amass an army because he's going to trust in the Lord to deliver. He has this mission from God. We'll fill in the gaps. I'm going to read quite a bit now, starting verse 17. When Samuel caught sight of Saul, the Lord said to him, "This is the man I spoke to you about. He will govern my people." Saul approached Samuel in the gateway and asked, "Would you please tell me where the seer's house is?" "I am the seer," Samuel replied. "Go up ahead of me to the high place, for today you are to eat with me. And in the morning I will send you on your way, and I will tell you all that is in your heart. As for the donkeys you lost 3 days ago, do not worry about them. They have been found. And to whom is all the desire of Israel turned, if not to you and your whole family?" Whew. Pretty good words. Okay, here's Saul's reaction to that, because that's pretty amazing. He's like, "Where's the seer live?" And Samuel's like, "I'm the seer, and I know who you are. I know you're looking for donkeys. They've been found. It's okay. Come to this special meal with me because you're going to be anointed ruler of Israel." And Saul says, "But am I not a Benjamite from the smallest tribe of Israel? And is not my clan the least of all the clans of the tribe of Benjamin? Why do you say such a thing to me?" Now we have to ask a question here. Is this humility? And it's tricky because it could look like humility. Hey, I'm not even supposed to be king. I'm not from Judah. I'm the least in my clan. This doesn't fit. But I don't think it's humility. Humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. C.S. Lewis. I think Saul's still thinking of himself. And we could say, well, there's a pretty good model like Gideon. The Lord comes to Gideon and says, "Hey, you're the guy." He's like, No, I'm not the guy." He's like, No, really, you're the guy. And so Gideon's like, "Well, how about we do this? How about we do a little test?" Turns out, you're the guy. "Well, how about we switch it up a bit, do one more test?" Yep, turns out you're still the guy. So is his initial response, "I'm not the right guy," humility or insecurity? Moses has a similar reaction. Moses, he's out in the wilderness after he's fled from Egypt, and God shows up in a burning bush, and he goes, "Hey, you're the guy. You're going to deliver my people." And Moses goes, "No, I can't even talk right." And God goes, No, you're the guy. And he's like, "No, I'm really not the guy. Can you send somebody else with me?" It's not humility. It's insecurity. Now, we could say, Paul says something similar. He says, "Hey, I'm the least of all the saints." But it's after he says, "Man, this grace that God has given me, this grace that is working in me," Ephesians 2:7 and 8, "this grace is amazing because I'm the least of all of these." And all of a sudden, we have a difference between insecurity and humility, because Paul's not saying, no. He's saying, "God, God's doing this. I'm the least, but God. And that is a subtle difference between humility and insecurity. I found this. Insecurity pushes us down. Humility lifts us up. He's denigrating himself. He's like, I'm not all of that. Insecurity causes us to hide. We'll see that in a second. Humility helps us show as we are without pretending. Insecurity whispers, you can't do it. Humility reminds us that with God, anything is possible. Insecurity tells us we need to change who we are. Humility invites us to become more of who God truly made us to be. Insecurity reminds us of our flaws. Humility encourages us to use our strengths and our gifts to serve. Insecurity compares us to others. Humility reminds us that God has a unique purpose for our lives. Insecurity tells us we are not enough. Humility says we have everything we need because God has given it to us. I think it's so important that we're careful not to confuse humility and insecurity. They are not the same thing. They have very different motivations. They have very different outcomes. And so while this might look like humility, based on the context, I'm going to argue it's insecurity. Saul is an incredibly insecure guy. And insecurity causes us to do all kinds of foolish things. Let's continue on. Verse 22. Then Samuel brought Saul and his servant into the hall and seated them at the head of those who were invited, about 30 in number. Samuel said to the cook, "Bring the piece of meat I gave you, the one I told you to lay aside." So the cook took up the thigh with what was on it and set it in front of Saul. Samuel said, "Here is what has been kept for you. Eat, because it was set aside for you for this occasion from the time I said, I have invited guests." And Saul dined with Samuel that day. After they came down from the high place to the town, Samuel talked with Saul on the roof of the house. They rose about daybreak, and Samuel called to Saul on the roof, "Get ready, and I will send you on your way." When Saul got ready, he and Samuel went outside together. As they were going down to the edge of town, Samuel said to Saul, "Tell the servant to go on ahead of us." And the servant did so. "But you stay here for a while so that I may give you a message from God." Again, this is pretty interesting because all of this is unfolding. And it's pretty cool that Saul can see this. Samuel had this whole thing set up. He told the cook, "Set aside this piece because God told me this special guy's coming. We're going to serve him really good food." Saul sits down at the head of the table. "This has been saved for you because even when I started to invite people, I knew you were coming." This is a significant day for Saul. Samuel takes him up on the roof and he goes, "Hey, we got to talk." We're not given that conversation. But then they get up the next morning. They go to the edge of town. The servant goes on, and Samuel and Saul talk. And he says, "Hey, I got to give you a message from God." Here's what I think Samuel's hope is. Humility flows from God's message to us. Humility flows out of God's message to us. This message that Samuel is about to give Saul is for his encouragement and his humility. Let's listen. Then Samuel took a flask of oil and poured it on Saul's head and kissed him, saying, "Has not the Lord anointed you ruler over his inheritance?" Okay, this is the first time this ever happens. It's the first time that a king is anointed. This is a significant moment in the history of Israel. Anointing had been done for priests, and it had been done for holy things to consecrate them for God's use. And now this is a declaration. The king is consecrated for God's use. This would have been a huge deal, unless, of course, Saul was not aware of or had regard for the things of God. Then this is weird. But for the people, for us, this is a significant moment. "When you leave me today," Samuel says, "you will meet two men near Rachel's tomb at Zelzah. on the border of Benjamin. They will say to you, the donkeys you set out to look for have been found. And now your father has stopped thinking about them and is worried about you. He is asking, what shall I do about my son? Then you will go on from there until you reach the great tree of Tabor. 3 men going up to worship God at Bethel will meet you there. One will be carrying 3 young goats, another 3 loaves of bread, and another a skin of wine. They will greet you and offer you 2 loaves of bread, which you will accept from them. After that, you will go on to Gibeah of God, where there is a Philistine outpost. As you approach the town, you will meet the procession of prophets coming down from the high place, with lyres and timbrels and pipes and harps being played before them, and they will be prophesying. The Spirit of the Lord will come powerfully upon you, and you will prophesy with them, and you will be changed into a different person. Once these signs are fulfilled, do whatever your hand finds to do, for God is with you. Wow, those would have been encouraging words, right? Hey, you want to know that what I've told you, you want to know that all that God has planned for you is going to come about. Here's 3 things. Here's 3 signs just on your way home, just to confirm that what's happening is God's plan. First, you're going to come to a guy near Rachel's tomb that's going to tell you exactly what was on your mind. Hey, donkeys have been found. Now your dad's worried about you. Great. Then you're going to keep going. And you're going to find 3 more men. They're going to have a feast in their hands. They're going to offer you 2 loaves of bread, and you're going to take them. Great. Thank you very much. And then you're going to come into this town where there's a Philistine outpost, and there's going to be prophets. They're going to be prophesying. There's going to be this huge worship event going on. You're going to join right in. The Spirit of the Lord is going to come upon you, and you're going to prophesy. And all of it happens. That's what gets unpacked in the next chunk, is everything to a T happens. And it's meant to encourage Saul. Hey, I know you don't feel like you're enough. I know you feel like you're just a Benjamite. I know that you feel like you're the least of your clan. I know that you feel you can't do this. This isn't right. But don't be insecure. Be humble and acknowledge that God is in this. Acknowledge that, wow, God is doing something and I am being asked to be involved. And that's a much different perspective. That should give courage. Oh man, God is in this. These 3 things happened. This is amazing. Wow. Yes, let's do it, Lord. So everything happens, and Samuel says, hey, when it all comes to pass, when everything happens just like I told you it would, then you can know that God's presence is with you. Go and do whatever is in your mind to do. Go and be the king. There's a Philistine outpost right there. Let's start taking care of business. You know your job. Go do whatever is on your heart to do. Because humility grows in God's presence with us. Humility flows from God's message to us. Humility grows in God's presence with us. In your life, the way to be humble is to look in God's Word. To allow God's Word to enter your mind and heart and to evaluate everything that's going on in yourself. Humans are insecure creatures. That's true for all of us. And so we're all prone to insecurity, and insecurity can cause us to miss God's message. Insecurity can be a blinder to us to hear what God has in store because we're convincing ourselves, I'm not enough. Which is true, and yet God says something about that. He says, I know you're not enough, but I am enough. And when you're willing to submit to me, when you're willing to allow my word to govern your life, when you're willing to allow me to be king, man, humility But humility is not weakness. Humility is not this sheepish disposition. Humility is strength. Humility is courage. Humility is power. And we see that in Jesus. Jesus is not insecure in the Gospels. Knows exactly who he is because of his Father, because of his relationship with his Father. And he goes through all of his life doing incredible things, teaching like nobody else, doing incredible miracles, being honored as God. Like, he had some things to take pride in, and yet he didn't. But it was powerful. It was courageous. And so here Saul has been given this task. Hey, you're gonna be my king. But he's insecure and he's missing God's message. He's not seeing what God has done. And he's not growing in that in this moment, nor in the rest of his life. Because even though God says, hey, I am with you, he ignores God's presence. Humility flows out of God's message to us. That is found in this book. And humility grows in us more and more and more as we realize, wow, God's with us. That's amazing. So here's the commentary that we get. As Saul turned to leave Samuel, God changed Saul's heart, and all these signs were fulfilled that day. When he and his servant arrived at Gibeah, and the procession of prophets met him, the Spirit of God came powerfully upon him, and he joined in their prophesying. When all those who had formerly known him saw him prophesying with the prophets, they asked each other, what is this that is happening to the son of Kish? Is Saul among the prophets? A man who lived there answered, and who is their father, their teacher? Who's the kind of the governing authority of these prophets? Like, who gave Saul the right to do this? So it became a saying, is Saul also among the prophets? After Saul stopped prophesying, he went to the high place. Okay, did all that God said. And then, now Saul's uncle asked him and his servant, where have you been? Okay, so apparently he gets home, like wonderful experience. But what's in his heart to do is to go home. Okay, so he goes home. Now Saul's uncle asked him and his servant, where have you been? Looking for the donkeys, he said. But when we saw they were not to be found, we went to Samuel. Saul's uncle said, oh, tell me what Samuel said. Little commentary there. But apparently Saul's uncle knows about Samuel. What? It's interesting. We're told who Saul's family is in a couple of chapters. And Saul's uncle is Abner's father. Abner becomes his mighty general in his army. So I'm guessing that Saul's uncle is no man to mess with, because Abner's a pretty amazing dude. So Saul's uncle is like, well, what did Samuel tell you? Saul replied, he assured us that the donkeys had been found, but he did not tell his uncle what Samuel had said about the kingship. Samuel to Saul, hey, these three amazing things are going to happen to you. The Spirit of God is going to come upon you. It's going to be awesome, and you can know that God is with you. Go and do everything that's in your heart. I don't think it's an accident that we're told that there's a Philistine outpost. I think it was earnestly God's desire that Saul and his servant, it's interesting that his son takes up this charge in a couple of chapters. Saul and his servant going to an outpost of the Philistines, and what does Saul do? I'll go home. And then I'll kind of hide the fact that Samuel just said, I'm going to be king. Insecurity. It gives us a blindness to God's message, and it causes us to ignore God's presence. Like, we can talk ourselves out of some pretty amazing things. But humility, understanding what God says about us and believing that God is with us, that changes us. And all of a sudden, we can do more than we ever thought possible. Samuel summoned the people of Israel to the Lord at Mizpah, and he said to them, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I brought Israel up out of the land of Egypt, and I delivered you from the power of the Egyptians and all the kingdoms that oppressed you. But you have now rejected your God, who saves you out of all the disasters and calamities, and you have said, appoint a king over us. So now present yourselves before the Lord by your tribes and clans." When Samuel had all Israel come forward by tribes, the tribe of Benjamin was taken by lot. Then he brought forward the tribe of Benjamin, clan by clan, and Marty's clan was taken. Finally, Saul, son of Kish, was taken. But when they looked for him, he was not to be found. This should be a red flag. This should be a big red flag. So they inquired further of the Lord, "Has the man come here yet?" And the Lord said, "Yes. He has hidden himself among the supplies." They ran and brought him out, and as soon as he stood among the people, he was a head taller than any of the others. This is a process like Samuel's like, "Hey, I can't just tell you that God told me that Saul's going to be your king." Not sure why he couldn't do that, but he didn't do that. He's like, "Let's do this by lot. Let's let everybody come on." And every tribe, okay, Benjamin, every clan, all right, Marty's clan, okay, here's Saul, son of Kish. Where is he? Oh, he's in the baggage. Okay, somebody go get him. We got him. And then the commentary is, "Oh, but he's so great." Whew. Insecurity can blind a whole group of people. Man, Israel wanted a king so badly that nobody pauses in this moment. They had not heard the message of God. The commentary from God himself in chapter 8 is that from Egypt on, they haven't been the people I wanted them to be. They haven't heard me. They haven't listened to me. And even though I've showed them over and over and over again that I am with them, they have totally rejected that. And man, when we miss God's message, when we ignore his presence, bad things happen. And the whole nation, like everybody's there, and nobody's concerned that this guy was hiding in the baggage. They're just like, "Look at him. He's so tall and handsome. Oh, what a guy." So much so that Samuel says some things here that are really troubling. Samuel said to all the people, "Do you see the man the Lord has chosen? There is no one like him among all the people." Then the people shouted, "Long live the king." This might begin to explain like Samuel's man crush on Saul that will be uncovered later on. Like, man, when God rejects Saul, Samuel takes it really hard. We're going to look at that. But like Samuel, in this moment, he's like, "Look at this guy. Isn't he amazing?" Like he's almost trying to like, I'm sure that Samuel was like, "What are you doing in the bags?" Totally. "What are you doing there, Saul? Come on out. Let's go." But then he's like, "Look at him. Isn't he amazing?" And then he does something else. Samuel explained to the people the rights and duties of kingship. Now, I'm assuming that he's like reading from Deuteronomy 17. Like that's where we find the rights and duties of kingship. Like this is how a king is supposed to behave. And in that, in Deuteronomy 17, it says something very specific that the king is supposed to do. What is the king supposed to do? From last week. He's supposed to write it down. He's supposed to write down what's in the law. Now, I don't know if that's the whole law. That would have taken some time. Or if it's just the part about the king, I don't know. But he's supposed to do it in front of the priest. He's supposed to sit down and go, okay, I'm going to write this out so I can commit it to memory so I know and I have a copy of what's expected. But what happens here? Then Samuel wrote down on a scroll and deposited it before the Lord. Then Samuel dismissed the people to go to their own homes. Samuel has been a star player. Like, he has been faithful as best as we can tell. And yet, man, at the end here, he has a bruised ego. Because in chapter 8, like, he's really disappointed that the people don't like him as the ruler. And he goes to God, and he's like whining to God. God, they've rejected me, and I don't understand. I've been a really good guy. And God's like, it's not about you, man. It's about me. But I think in that moment, there's a bruised ego in Samuel, and some things begin to happen where he's like, man, I still got to look good. Like, I don't want to go out. The people think I'm old. The people think my sons are schmucks. They want a king, and here we are. And now the king is hiding in the bags, the guy that I chose, that, okay, the Lord chose, but it looks bad on me. And so he goes, look at this guy. And then he's like, this is what we're supposed to do. And then he does it. And he doesn't give it to the king. He doesn't go, hey, Saul, here's your copy. Hang it on your wall. He goes, we're going to tuck this in a book. We're going to put it before the Lord. Guess what? The Lord knew already. The one who needed the reminder was Saul. So there's a number of things that begin to happen here because all of a sudden, insecurity has taken root. And insecurity is not humility. Now, I would say throughout my life, I have struggled with insecurity. And these couple of chapters, they've hit me afresh this week, and I go, wow. Man, could I be done with that? Could I just put insecurity aside? But here's what I know. It's not just me. Every human being. Samuel, this incredible man of God who knows the ways of God. He's quoting the Old Testament. He's showing the people the right thing to do. And yet there's this bruised ego in him. And he's like, am I enough? And God's like, no, you're not. And that's okay. And that's the part we need to hear. There are so many things in our lives that Satan loves to use to cause us to doubt our worth before God, to remind us of our weakness, to bring shame and guilt into our lives, and that's all related to insecurity. And then what we try to do is we try to cover up for ourselves. We're like, no, I'm enough, I'm good enough. It's I can do it. And God's message to us is, hey, you know what? Everybody has fallen short. Every human being has fallen short of what God desired. And God says, guess what? It's okay because I provided a way. And he said that to Saul. Look what I'll do for you, Saul. I'm with you, and I've given my message to you to encourage you and to convince you that I'm here, and that's enough. If I'm with you, that's enough. So will you be about what I want you to be about? And Saul's answer is no. Now here's I think the problem. Insecurity is contagious. So like when we come to what God has called us to do, and we're like, I don't think I'm enough to do that. The real problem is that's contagious. And all of a sudden, everyone around us starts to go, I don't know. And we start to convince ourselves of some really foolish things. And it might even be really small stuff. Like, is it really that important that the king writes this stuff down? Is it really that important that the king gets a copy of this? Yeah, it is. Humility, true humility. And here's our thing. God opposes the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. Like that amazing grace that we sang about. The grace that Paul talks about in Ephesians 2 that gives him this incredible boldness even while he's saying, I am the least of the saints. That grace is given to humble people. You want to be humble? You have to hear the message of God. The message of God is you are not enough. You have fallen short. But because of his great love for you, he has made a way for you to have peace with God and to be able to walk in his presence fully assured that when you need help, he's there. So that, man, when he calls us into things, we're like, okay, God, you and me, let's do it. Humility flows from God's message to us. And it grows in God's presence with us. And in that, we can see incredible things happen. But without that, man, we see foolishness, bad decisions, and the calamitous results. The gospel invites us to fix our eyes on Jesus. The gospel invites us not simply to fix our eyes on Jesus, but through a relationship with him to become like him. And he was humility incarnate. Jesus heard and listened to and believed the message of God for him. And his humility flowed out of that. In those hard moments, okay, guys, I got to go be alone with my Father because I need to hear his message to me. And it grounded him and it rooted him in this humble, obedient way. And that just continued to grow and grow and grow as God was present with him. Even to the point of death on a cross. And it was confirmed in him. Yep, God is with him as he raised him from the dead. And then Jesus was able to say, and here comes the Holy Spirit in a very different way than it came on Saul. Because it's with us. It's in us. He, the Spirit, is in us. God has made his presence in us. And in that we can embrace this humility where we can say, yes, I've fallen short. I'm the least. And yet, God is great and gracious.